Welcome to the final edition of our In-between-esodes. As we continue to celebrate Nexus PMG's 7-year anniversary, today I have the great pleasure of interviewing Roshan Vani, COO and co-founder. Listen to Roshan share his story of Nexus PMG's early beginnings to where we are today. And now, on to the show. Hello, and welcome to the last installment of our special 7-year anniversary series. I'm your host, Raj Daniels, and today I have the pleasure of welcoming back our COO and co-founder of Nexus PMG, Roshan Vani. Roshan, how are you doing today?
Good, Raj. Thanks for having me back on.
Roshan, thank you for being back on. Roshan, as you know, I like to open the show by asking my guests the following question. If you were asked to share something interesting about yourself, what would it be?
I was expecting this question, and ahead of this call, I actually asked you, what did you think was interesting about me? I actually struggle to answer this quite a bit. My wife gave me a bunch of ideas, and a lot of those were around my personality and I guess my tenacity to figure things out and get things done. And you kind of reiterated that. I think for me, one of the things that maybe I find interesting about myself is I have a crazy desire to travel. When I graduated, I actually had a really great job opportunity in Maryland, but I ended up getting into the EPC world, specifically with Bechtel, because they basically granted me the opportunity to go build big things and travel the world while doing it. And I thought that was a really interesting proposition for someone like me, and that was something that drove me. And so, the first 12 years of my career, I actually moved 8 times across those 12 years with a good mix of field home office assignments, along with an international assignment, which for all the listeners that have listened to Ben and Paul, I was joking with Raj ahead of this. I said I'm going to struggle to answer some of these questions because Ben and Paul took all the great low hanging fruit on a lot of our story. And so forgive me if it's somewhat repetitive to the other guys' interviews. I have the unfortunate event of going last, I guess.
I did it alphabetically, so no favoritism. But I want to go back to that travel thing for a moment. This desire to travel, where did it come from?
I think for those that know me really well, I spend a lot of time thinking and trying to find correlations. And I know it's one of the things that drives probably my wife nuts the most because I'm always trying to figure out, you go back to my personality. How did I get that inquisitive nature that I have, the desire to research the hell out of everything to the nth degree? It's just something that's weird about me. But I don't know where my desire to travel comes from. I know, mom and dad were pretty good when we were young. I don't, outside of maybe I grew up in Maryland, and we had the mountains 2 hours to the west and the beach 2.5 hours to the east. So outside of just kind of going to the ocean every summer for, a couple of days, my parents were pretty good about any like major trip, not to the same place twice. And so they always, we took a couple international trips, and we would take lots of road trips around the United States. So maybe it stems from that. But I don't know. For me, it's just the idea of staying in one place for so long seemed to get boring. Yeah, I like to change and mix things up, and so that's kind of comes back to my personality, I guess.
Well, that is interesting, and thank you for sharing that. So, Roshan, I'm going to take a left turn here. Take us back 7 years ago, July 2013. Where are you, and what were you doing, professionally speaking?
Yeah, so Ben and Paul talk quite a bit about us being in Saudi Arabia, and I know Ben gave some background on the project we were on, and so I think a lot of that part of that story has been told. What I'll try to do is actually go take it maybe a couple of steps backwards for a second, and maybe tell the story leading up to when, Ben specifically in his interview, I know he spoke to me walking in the room with Ben and Paul and saying, let's go. And so, what's maybe an interesting statement to add to the last question is, and tying it back to my personality is, don't tell me I can't do something. And I think for anyone that's in a large corporate environment, and I think we're going to see this change over, the next several years, especially if you look at the pandemic and how quick corporations have had to implement and move everything from restaurants having to implement delivery and curbside pickup within a week. They moved like a startup, which is really interesting. But I struggled with my personality in corporate because I always want to tinker and try something different. I don't believe that simply because we've done it one way that's the right way to do it. And so I without sharing, that does get you into trouble sometimes. There's probably stories I could tell over a round of beers, maybe not necessarily on a podcast, of some of the troubles that I did get into with that portion of my personality. But that specific example, and Ben actually does know the story. He didn't want to throw me under the bus, but I was doing something that was deemed by my organization as maybe not 100% of what they would approve of. And it's one of the things that maybe when we get to some of the other questions, I'd like to say how Nexus can be different. But effectively, I was told that I should stop doing what I was doing, even though it was adding value to others. And that frustrated me to the point where, and Paul talked about this a little bit, Ben, Paul, and I were kind of all cut from the same cloth on work hard, try different things, and with the end goal of doing right by your client and doing quality work. And there was a moment in my career, and what's actually funny, and Ben and Paul actually left this out, is they were trying to get me to leave for several months, and I had this mindset of, and I call myself an accidental entrepreneur, and we can talk about that a little bit later, where I definitely have a lot behind me and driving me, but I wanted to be a senior vice president. I had ambitions within a large corporation. And unfortunately for me, just I think with how I work and my thought process around procedures and certain things, that I'm not really cut out to be in a corporate environment. And in that particular moment when that happened, basically walking in the door and picking up where Ben's story, started effectively, walking in the door and saying, all right, guys, I'm ready. Let's do this. And so Ben and Paul had been we all had kind of an idea of taking big company processes into the middle market effectively was one of the first data points of what we were trying to accomplish. I know Ben talked about it from, if you really explore the landscape of what happened in that 2008 to 2013, I mean, a lot of the large EPCs were going overseas. There was no real big mega projects that were being executed in the United States, and there was quite a few mid-size EPCs or single trade E&I contractors or piping contractors that really grew in the void that was left when the bigger EPCs went overseas, and they grew from big round numbers, 150 million, let's say, to 750 million in revenue. And with that kind of growth over 4 or 5 years, there's definitely a need for processes, even though I just got done talking about processes and how they drive me nuts. But, and the idea was to take those big company processes and thought processes on how do you execute these larger jobs and kind of bring them into what we deemed at the time the middle market. And as Ben or Paul, I can't remember, speak to, what we quickly learned is EPCs, no matter how great your mousetrap is or how innovative you are or how you think about risk, it doesn't really matter, because internally there's a thought around, we hired for that. Our team should be able to do it, and you're just not going to be able to kind of penetrate that. And so I thought we did a really great job pivoting, and maybe that's one of those key values that we talk about towards the end of the podcast is, being somewhat nimble and, you may be on the right thread or have the right idea, but if the market doesn't really want it, then it's okay to take a version of that and pivot. And so um, that that was basically the original idea, is let's go consult in this space. We were a services business, and that's what we had to offer the market. I think the only other thing that the other guys didn't really talk about was our software product, Cloud EPC. And funny enough, that kind of starts with the same story, which Ben Hubbard told me. Um, I bet you can't build a earned value database. And I'm like, hold my beer and watch this. And so Cloud EPC actually started as a dare, by telling me I couldn't do something, and the first version of it was actually built in an Access database. But it stemmed from the idea of, and you can kind of read the story a little bit more in one of our blogs on our website. But the idea that, why would I hire um, three young fellows in the construction industry? I got boots older than you. And so the idea of risk analysis and data management and leveraging your data to make you better was the original value proposition. And we've kind of grown quite a bit since then. So that was kind of the envision for Nexus. I mean, I don't think any of us would have predicted where we are today. But I think what we all believed in is ourselves and our ability to work together as a team. And I think, Paul speaks to, bringing on some key folks that really helped us continue to reshape the business and to where we are today. So, I think for us, for those of you that are aware of the term, the startup valley of death, I think in those early years, it was just figure out your market fit, figure out what you can do, and survive the valley of death. So in those early years, that was really what it was all about, is just constantly changing and testing the market to figure out how we fit and where the demand really was and how we can be different. And Ben speaks to that in his a little bit on how we do feel like we're different and what we've built isn't easily copied. And that was another big part of what we believed in the early years. Is there's a lot of consultants in the space, but one of the things in year 1 and 2 we talked about a lot is we wanted to issue reports with our logo on it. We wanted to be an independent entity to our clients, and we actually turned down a few assignments in the early days where it was effectively what we always called, back in those days, we're not a body shop, we're not a project management body shop. And there's a lot of that. There's a lot of people that built great businesses by doing that, by finding resources and placing them on a project, as effectively as a middleman between clients and the owners. But that, for us, that was a big part of what we didn't want to do. We wanted our own brand identity, and we wanted to be an independent voice in these projects.
So you took us back to where you were in 2013, and you answered my next question regarding, what you, Ben, and Paul envisioned for Nexus. I'm going to fast forward a little bit to 2018, 2019, to the pivot to zero carbon and low carbon initiatives. Now, was this another situation where you were challenged and you said, "Hold my beer, watch what I can do"?
It was. These questions are hard because it's never black and white. Ben did a really good job kind of explaining that one meeting where we really made the decision. But I think up until that point, if you looked at the data, and I think he did a good job really expressing it, where we did, and we believe in sustainability. We absolutely do, as individuals, as leaders of this company. I mean, I'm a composter. I like compost at home. I'm a gardener. I believe in it, but we're also, entrepreneurial at heart, and we wanted to build a sustainable business. Myself, Ben, and Paul are also heavily data driven. And I think if you looked at the data, and Ben kind of speaks to it, I mean, we'd be lying if we said we didn't believe the markets were moving in this direction. And so from a pure business perspective, first and foremost, I mean, we absolutely believe this is where the markets were shifting. I mean, if you just looked at and we made a conscious decision to stay away from solar and wind because we felt like we were late to the party. But if you just looked at the cost of solar, if you looked at where the money was going, the fact that, in that 2013 kind of time frame, you had big traditional banking offering products into the market, really told you something that, venture capitalists and the higher risk investors were moving on to something different. And quite frankly, the data that we had and the types of projects we were working on was that they were moving into these other alternative energy, alternative infrastructure sectors in the low carbon sector. And so for us, it made a lot of sense because, and I talk about this on the other podcast I recorded with you, that's what we were more suited for anyway. We came from large energy, more complicated processes, and being able to apply our skill set into biodiesel, densification around, wood products, wood pellets specifically, those types of things gave us an edge to use a lot of the skill sets we learned in heavy, traditional energy infrastructure and apply those to a market that was just kind of finding itself and needed the organization, needed the detailed level planning, needed the system, needed the original idea behind cloud EPC, and needed all of those things. And we had the processes. We tie it back together. We brought those big company processes into the middle market, just in a different way, right? And so, leading up to that specific meeting that Ben was referred to, there was murmurs of it. We had already been talking about it. We had a small segment in oil and gas. If you looked at, we do a lot of metric-based analysis types of projects we're already working on, the client base, how much of our clients are repeat business. And you looked at the data, and a large chunk of that pie chart was in this alternative sector. So it made a lot of sense. Why not go all into this sector? There was, at the time, not a lot of players in the market. So from a business perspective, it just made a lot of sense. And then you couple that with the triple bottom line, and it made even more sense. And so, when the stars align like that, you jump on it as quick as you can. And, I talk about pivoting a lot and testing and trying different things. And, that day in the room when we made that decision, the biggest concern was around, what about the clients that we're already working with? And that's kind of the 2021 target. So by January 2021, we wanted to be out of oil and gas completely, and not, and so that gave us a window to ramp down and not just leave our clients hanging. It gave us an internal target to say, okay, from this day forward, we're not going to take any new assignments. And when we hit the ground running in January 2021, and by the way, March of this year, we're basically out of it. So we actually beat our own internal target, but and we hadn't taken on any projects since that, Q4 of 2018 when we made the decision. So it's something that we're really proud of for sure. And, all the different events between data and our own personal beliefs leading up to that meeting, to make that decision, it was actually quite easy at that point. We believed in it, and we saw the numbers and the market and the data was telling us this is where it was going. So, and then Ben elaborates a lot more on, how we approached our clients, and it was actually quite amazing to hear their feedback.
So I have a specific, unique question for you. I know your love of technology, being a technologist. In the zero carbon, low carbon initiative space, is there a technology that has particularly intrigued you, and which ones are they?
I don't think it's going to. So what interests me more, and I hate to use the same answer I gave on episode 24, by the way, if anyone wants to go back and listen, I got to get my plays up. Ben and I have a competition. So, but what I think is the idea of decentralization as being a much more interesting thing, because I think there's going to be lots of different solutions, dropping a couple of other names on, because, I'm an avid listener of the podcast. I listen to every episode. The idea behind Vani and what they're doing and tracking water flow and what they're going to be able to accomplish with working with centralized water treatment and the local counties, and then public partnership on how that data, again, as a technologist, that's not really a complicated sensor, but the data platform that they're building becomes really interesting, right? To be able to track water flows and all of that, and how that data can be used for master planning at a city level, but then also in just waste management. There's, are there ways we can solve that by taking some of the pressure off of the waste haulers themselves through composting? And so what I like is the idea of decentralization. And each one of those major verticals, there's going to be 5 different things that are going to solve those problems of energy generation, energy transmission, water transmission, all of the things. When you think about infrastructure, it's no single thing. That's what excites me the most. And I think when you take that up a level to the amount of jobs it's going to create across, across the entire spectrum of energy and infrastructure, that gets really interesting. So, thinking about how do you convert, upgrading a bunch of big refineries and taking that same kind of workforce and creating 20 years worth of jobs, rebuilding our infrastructure to be more sustainable is probably what excites me more. I like to, you know, solutions are constantly changing. The science behind it is always kind of the same. There's kind of different companies that do things really well from a cultural standpoint, and from an implementation just slightly different. But pyrolysis, gasification, they're all kind of different versions. The black boxes are just slightly different. That's a little bit unique to each company in terms of what feedstock they put in. But the idea, or the macro view of decentralizing and kind of going back, separating that, and what am I trying to think of here? But the the idea of just kind of breaking that from one large entity having to deal with the entire burden of our waste, or understanding, where do we go upgrade our pipes, and taking that and leveraging technology, both from a data software as well as a hardware and a clean tech perspective, simply to rebuild our infrastructure is what excites me. And that's a 20-year, 30-year horizon, right? And that's fun. That's going to be interesting. It's a big, complicated problem to solve.
So, staying on the theme of decentralization, and I think you were talking about disaggregating the technologies also, it looks like you take a very thematic approach to the way you view things. What are some of the valuable lessons you would say you've learned along the way?
So, one of the big ones for me that I'm still trying to figure out how to, um, I guess, pull back on a little bit is never say no. When I talk about moving 8 times in 12 years, there was a lot of yeses in there, from big corporate asking me to go take a field assignment on a project to, coming back to the home office to do something different and work with an engineering task force, to taking on some overhead projects. And so, when I look around with, some of the folks within Nexus PMG, and, some of the innovative things that we're doing, there's definitely an element that I see a version of that in a couple of, quite frankly, most of the folks here. And so the idea of never saying no to try something new and different is definitely in my DNA, and Ben's DNA for sure, Paul's as well, in terms of, quite frankly, all of us. It's kind of, no matter where you go within the company, I think that idea of like trying something different is definitely part of who we are, and I don't think you can manufacture that. That comes back to the culture statement I think Ben was talking about, and so that's a big one for me. The other one that I've been spending a lot of time on, and I think I'm getting better at, is really becoming self-aware of who you are as an individual, and audit your life, audit your skill sets, and just recognize, quite frankly, what you suck at. I mean, there's no other way for me to put it, because when I think about myself and some of my own weaknesses, by teaming up with other individuals within the company, or just owning the fact that there's, these are my weaknesses, and I scaffold with other team members. Like, I don't, that has allowed, I think, me and others within the company to really like flourish. Where once we start leaning on each other as a team, the idea of one person having to do it all and be the end all be all of any organization or as any, in any team is just crazy. And I think in the most recent blog, I kind of talk about that specifically from a team dynamic perspective is, Ben, Paul, and I are all very different. When we started this company, we leaned on each other's strengths. Now, in the early days, we all wanted to be involved in every decision. I think I say that in the blog as well, where once we became okay with letting go and trusting in each other, we were able to get 3 times more amount of work done. And so, um, and when we needed help, we just asked for it. And so that idea of auditing your own life and your skill set and just kind of recognizing what you suck at, I think is a pretty powerful thing. I mean, it really, once you kind of accept it and own it, and then you ask for help, I think it really kind of opens up your own perspective. And the reality in life and especially in business is that it's all a team game. And so, working with the team around you to grow an enterprise, to grow a business, to, even in your personal life, to, kind of admit your faults with your, significant other or even your children, to just kind of figure out how do you all grow together and then just kind of work together around your faults on, it really just strengthens a relationship.
Those are some great lessons. Staying on the topic of auditing and recognizing, where do you see Nexus in 2025?
So, we have our 5-year and our longer vision plans. I think Ben and Paul both in their episodes talked through culture, scaling culture, and building something which is very difficult in a services business that's not repeatable or hard to replicate. And so, I won't repeat a lot of what they say. I may take this question and answer it a little bit differently on what would make, if I were to look back or if I was in 2025, a couple of things I would like to have seen happen as a softer win, maybe is a better way to put it, than invested in 25 projects. I know Ben and Paul actually both talked to putting our own capital into projects, and doing more on that side. And Paul talked about how we kind of own the entire life cycle of a project and really being recognized as the lead in alternative technology. Where I would start classifying some softer wins in 2025, to add a different layer. And this is, I would like to see a couple employees actually come to Nexus PMG with an amazing idea, own it, even maybe potentially make a small business plan around it, and either spin off and go do their own thing, with us as a support function, or Nexus PMG creates a new business line. When I think about the story that I told at the beginning of this podcast and kicking in the door, and I don't think I actually kicked in the door. I'm not that agile, but walking into Ben and Paul's office and saying, "All right, I'm ready. Let's do this." Right? That frustration, that boiling point of the spark that created Nexus PMG. I would love to say we were a part of creating something new, and we fostered a culture and an environment where, 2 businesses were created out of this, 3 businesses were created out of it, or a business line even was created out of it. I think that from a softer side would be something amazing to look back on and say, holy crap, that came out of this other idea. And so I think that would be really interesting. And, a version of that also is, we're doing more creation of our own patents. We have and own our own IP in different technologies. So I think again that's the hardware, software in me, the hardcore technologist, if you will. I think there's a lot that we can do, and in the markets that we play in, to get you build up more IP in those sectors and really own the market, like the other guys were saying, and even deploy our own tech into the space. That would be like that long-term horizon of, I think, what we could work to, that was a 2025 question, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so that kind of excites me to just give a different perspective on the answers that have already been given. I think that also plays really well and runs in parallel, quite frankly, with the idea of what we are setting as goalposts for ourselves in terms of investing our own capital into projects, developing our own projects, and leveraging that, what we've built to date to, if you want to call it an engineering engine, a development engine to create new projects and, develop in this alternative energy sector. I think that plays right into there and runs in parallel, but gives it a slightly different perspective or answer. So that's where I would love to see us migrate into.
Well, I think it's great to hear a metrics driven guy speak about a softer vision or a softer wins. And I look forward to working shoulder to shoulder with you to help you paint that beautiful vision. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Roshan?
No, I did and sometimes I forget because you and I work so closely together. But there is an element of this story, when you go back to 2018, 2019, that I didn't really touch on. That's probably worth talking about. And you kind of remind me when you said touching on the softer side, but it's kind of funny when we made the decision that we wanted to go into this alternative energy sector. That was also the moment in time we made the decision that we needed to tell our story to the world, and not just our story, the story of the sector. And no one really talks about the birth of Bigger Than Us. And no one actually, I think it's worth mentioning. I mean, the idea of building we call it internally, the media empire that we're trying to build is different. It's very different in this sector, and it's worth talking about. I mean, I remember one of the initial conversations around what we're trying to build here, and I know Ben had mentioned some of the things that are coming down the pipe around the educational side. But on that first kind of meeting on like how do we do something different, telling our story and other people's story, and this was even before a podcast was even really envisioned. It was I remember being sitting in a room with a client and them asking a bunch of questions and were amazed at all the things we were doing. And that was the original light bulb that was like, we have to do a better job telling a story of our story, what we're doing, and then quite frankly, the market story on what others are doing, because it really is going to be amazing. At this point, we were just really getting the data. I mean, we were seeing the money flow into these sectors. It was clear as data to us, but when you talk to others, I remember actually one of my mentors I was mentioning this to was, oh, we tried doing stuff in biomass, in 2005, 2006, and it never worked. It's like, yeah, well, that was like 10 years ago. Like, it's changed quite a bit. You should really look at it again, kind of thing. And so that was kind of the spark. And, I'm really proud of what we're building. And so when I think about 2025, I think outside of, building our own, the answer I just gave, I am pumped to see what the media empire, as we always joke, that we're trying to build is going to look like. So, some of the things that we already got stood up and we're coming down the pike as it grows, and as we watch Bigger Than Us grow, it's going to be cool to look back and see, just how explosive the growth is on this side of the fence, and where this is going to go. Because Raj, I think you're doing an amazing job, and I think the stories that you're telling add a lot to not just who we are, but just the market story. And that was, in that circa 2017, 18, that was a big part of we were trying to figure out how do you tell the story. And I think this platform that you've been instrumental in creating is quite amazing, quite frankly. And so, yeah, that's the other thing I probably wanted to add to this discussion.
Well, I appreciate that. And the last thing I'd like to add is that what I love about the media empire idea is the intent behind it. And the intent of the podcast and the education piece is that from the podcast perspective, we're really working to highlight, as you mentioned, all the individuals that are doing such great work in the sector. And the education piece that's to come is that how can we inform and educate all the way from, let's say, our young children that are in elementary and kindergarten, all the way through adults. As you know, recently I've been communicating with a young man out of Canada, His name is Kevin, and he's been really following the podcast well. And I sent him an email this morning telling him that this is exactly why we're doing it, not only to highlight the individuals, but also highlight all the different entry points and all the different opportunities that people can engage in this clean tech, green tech sector. So I really appreciate you highlighting that, Roshan, and I look forward to growing it with you.
Yeah, shout out to Kevin. Got that email forwarded to me. Well,
absolutely.
Appreciate you listening, bud.
Thank you so much, Roshan. I look forward to catching up with you again soon.
All right, bud. Talk to you later.
Thank you for listening. If you like our show, please give us a rating and review on iTunes. And you can show your support by sharing our show with a friend or reach out to us on social media, where you'll find us under our Nexus PMG handle. If there's a subject or topic you'd like to hear about, send me an email, btu@nexuspmg.com, or contact me via our website, nexuspmg.com. And while you're there, you can sign up for our monthly newsletter, where we share what we're reading and thinking about in the clean tech, green tech sectors. Bigger Than Us is a Nexus PMG production.